Okay, so I'm going to throw a cylinder. I've got approximately 2 pounds of clay, and you'd like to start with somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 2 pounds of clay. It's been wedged. You want to turn your wheel on the right side, put the foot pedal wherever it's comfortable for your right foot. I'm going to take my piece of clay, and I'm not just going to set it down on the wheel head because when the wheel spins, it's going to fly off. So I'm going to take it and smack it down on a relatively dry wheel head, and then gradually get the wheel spinning. I want to make sure that my hands are always wet. If I ever feel any friction or the clay dry out, I want to add water. The first step to a cylinder is centering. Centering is the most important step, and it's oftentimes the hardest for people. While I'm centering the clay, I want to gradually get the wheel up to as fast as I feel comfortable, which is probably going to be about a medium speed at this point for you. First, I'm going to show you what centered clay looks like, and then I'm going to explain better how to do it. So this clay is centered. If I cup it, my hands are not pulsing at all like this. So while the wheel's spinning, I cup it, and my wrist is not bouncing or my elbow is not bouncing. This clay is centered, this clay is not centered. So in order to center the clay, you're using the meaty part of both of your hands, your left hand and your right hand. The meaty part is where all your muscles are. I'm going to put my elbow into my body and lean into the clay at 6 o'clock with my left hand, and my right hand is folded over the top. So my right hand is making contact here. The meaty part of my hand is putting pressure right here. I'm using equal pressure from both hands so they cancel each other out. If I use too much pressure with my right hand, this flattens out like a pancake, which I don't want. If I use too much pressure with my left hand, this gets too tall. I want to use equal pressure from both hands so they cancel each other out, and this maintains a little dome that is about as wide as it is tall. Constantly adding water. The key to centering is making sure my left elbow is into my body. If my elbows are out like this, I can never center it. I'll wrestle with it for days. I need to make sure my left elbow is tucked into my stomach or up against my thigh or my hip bones. My left hand is responsible for centering from here down, so really the bulk of this piece. So this could be totally off center. As long as I lean into it with my body and push straight in at 6 o'clock, once it starts to settle down and still out, I've hit the sweet point. At that point, I lock this hand in place, and my right hand deals with just the cap. So really centering is all about getting the right amount of pressure with this hand. And you'll also notice that I'm leaning over the wheel while I'm doing this. I'm not back here like this, and I'm also sitting as close as possible. If your stool is back like this, you can't do anything successfully. You want to make sure your stool is as close as it can get to the wheel, and you are as close as you can get, so there's no space at all. So tuck my elbow in, totally off center. All I have to do is lock this arm in place, push in with my elbow through my wrist, and then when I use the right amount of pressure and it steadies out, I lock this arm in place and stop pushing forward. I don't want to tear this off the wheel. And then my right hand deals with the cap. Once I think it's centered, I slowly release my pressure in my hands. If I come off too fast, it will bounce back and be off center. To check the clay, I cup it while it's spinning and make sure that my hands aren't pulsing like this. If my hands are pulsing at all, that means it's not centered. But I can tell it's centered by looking at my hands and my wrist and my elbow, and none of them are moving at all, so this is good. I usually come in and kind of periodically clean this up, put this back in my bucket, and now I'm going to slow it down. Centering is the only time the wheel is spinning as fast as you're comfortable, at least a medium speed. So now it's kind of a slow medium speed, and it'll be spinning the same speed for the next 3 steps. So there's 4 steps to a cylinder. Centering the clay, and now I'm going to open it up. It's nice and wet, and I'm cupping the outside with my 2 hands, leaning on my legs or the splash pan, and I'm going to use my 2 thumbs, and I'm going to find the center and slowly go down the center. Once you go down an inch or 2, you're going to realize that it gets pretty dry, so you're going to slowly take your thumbs out and dribble a little water in and continue down. At some point you're going to realize also that your thumbs aren't long enough to make it down to the bottom. So your wrists and kind of shoulders have to come up and your fingers cross over each other to help you get down to the bottom. Never do I want to have my fingers come off like this. If my fingers come off like this, unlock this off center. Once your clay's off center, it never goes back on center. You have to start over with a freshly wedged piece of clay. So once I think I'm getting close to the bottom, I want to stop the wheel and test the depth. So you want something like about this, which is roughly a ½ inch, somewhere between 1/4 inch and ½ inch. If it's this thick, I would know that I could go down further with my thumbs. If I go down too far, there's nothing I can do about that. That means I'll have no floor to what I'm making. Every step of the way, you want to double check to make sure that it's still centered. I'm going to cup it while it's spinning, and if at this point, if it were off center, I would know that I had struggled with putting the thumbs down and I didn't do that well. So analyzing every step of the way to figure out where you're knocking it off is something that you're going to want to do. So this looks good. The next step is making my floor. I'm going to put my left hand back where it was when I was centering, and I'm going to use these 2 fingers and my thumb here. And I'm going to start at the wall here at about 6 o'clock and drag towards me and open up a flat floor. My arms are into my body for stability, and I slowly drag towards me and then lightly release my pressure. So my inside floor should be roughly 2 inches, 2.5 inches wide. If I pulled the floor so far that you saw a bulge here on the outside, that would have been too far and you would knock it off center. So I just pull it on the inside and you really can't even tell from the outside. Now I'm also going to use my sponge, and I'm going to push down and just ride over the floor with my sponge while it's spinning. And this is compressing the floor. There are a couple reasons things crack when we make them out of clay, and one of them is lack of compression. So I want to make sure I compress the floor so it doesn't crack. And now I'm going to do the last step, which is my poles. I can tell it's still centered. If at any point it's not level, and it's taller on one side than another, or thicker on one side than another, then that means you got it off center. So this looks pretty good, and now I'll do my poles. The wheel's still spinning kind of a slow to medium speed. I'm going to use these 4 fingers with the sponge on the outside and my left thumb on the outside. And I'm going to push out from the inside and in from the outside and pinch that thickness and spread it up. And this thumb is down, helping me do the pull. If it's up like this, I will be very unsteady. So I want the thumb to be down. So I start at the bottom on the outside, bottom on the inside, pinch, and slowly pull up. It should take me a good 5 or 6 seconds to get to the top. And when I get to the rim, I just lightly release. I want to pull all the way up to the rim and then release, but I don't want to pull through the rim like that, because that will happen, which we don't want. So I pull all the way up and then just lightly release. Go back down and do another pull. If your piece does not get any taller as you're doing your pulls, then you want to add more pressure. If you use too much pressure and pull it all up at once, you're going to knock it off center. So we're aiming for something like 4 or 5 pulls per piece. It's a good idea to count, because you really want to make sure that you don't go too fast. Starting at the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it should take you somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 seconds as this gets taller to get to the top. If you speed through it, it'll get knocked off center. And I think that I have maybe 1 more pull, and I'm judging that by looking down on the outside and the inside and seeing how much thickness is still down there that needs to be spread up. So I'm going to try 1 more pull. While I'm doing my pulls for a cylinder, I'm using equal pressure from both hands so they cancel each other out and become a cylinder. If you find that you're making bowls or your piece gets wider at the top as you pull up, that's because you're using more pressure with your inside hand. Because a bowl, you'll be using more pressure with your inside hand so it goes out. We're aiming for a cylinder, equal pressure from both hands and straight up. So this looks pretty good. I would ride my sponge over the rim, clean up the bottom, soak up any water that's settled down there. Water can cause a crack. At some point also while you're making this piece, you want to compress your floor, and that just means push down with your sponge on the floor while the wheel is spinning, and that will compress it. Lack of compression or leaving water on the bottom can lead to cracks. Another thing to remember also is that you never want to touch the pot unless it's spinning. A lot of times people will stop the wheel and go, yeah, this looks pretty good, and do that and knock it off center. So any cleanup that you do, you want to clean it up while the wheel is spinning. When you think you're done, you're going to take your wooden knife wooden knife has a round side and an angled side. I'm going to take the angled side and glide it on the wheel head and stick it in at about 6 o'clock just to create a spot for my wire tool. So I stuck it in maybe half an inch. And use my 2 thumbs, and on the small part of the splash pan, which is at the top, push down and away, and I can release the splash pan. I'm going to take water and flood the wheel head, putting way more water than I think I need. I'm going to take my wire tool and hold on to the 2 pieces of wood, wrap it around so I have maybe 7 inches, and I'm dragging this water underneath towards me and then back again. I have a board, and I want to make sure that my board is also wet. If the board is not wet, you can't slide the piece onto it. 4 fingers, each about an inch apart, and I'm going to push and twist. If it doesn't move immediately, undercut it again. You'd rather undercut it 3 or 4 times than force it. So it should slide nice and easily. Line my board up with the wheel head and slide this off. You don't have to worry about all these finger marks because eventually we're going to trim this, which means we're going to clean up the bottom from about here down. So any finger marks on the bottom 1.5 inches will be taken away later, so don't have to worry about that. So again, there are 4 main steps to a cylinder. Centering the clay, it's the only time the wheel is spinning fast as you're comfortable, at least a medium speed. Centering it, and then slow it down to a slow medium speed, and you're going to cup it, put your thumbs down, then make your floor, then pull up